Welcome to Risk Matters, the insurance podcast brought to you by DWF and your global guide to the latest trends and issues in the insurance and reinsurance industry. Join us as we explore topical issues, emerging technologies, and the innovative strategies that are shaping the global future of insurance.
Welcome to Risk Matters, the insurance podcast from DWF. Today, we will be talking about tackling insurance fraud in Europe. My name is Lorraine Carolan. I'm the Global Head of Fraud at DWF, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Ben McBean, who is the Assistant Claims Manager for QBE International and a key member of QBE's multi-award-winning Special Investigations Unit. Also, Romain Dupeyré, a partner at DWF in France, and Endri Malaj, an associate of DWF in Italy. So turning to our first question, and I'll put this to you, Ben. What are the main fraud risks and trends currently observed in Europe?
Hi, thanks for having me today. One of the things that we find is a major issue at the moment is to do with synthetic identities. So where criminals are utilising aspects of a genuine person's identity and trying to use that as part of setting up a claim or a policy. So they'll make documents such as driving licenses and that sort of thing to make a fraudulent claim. We're also seeing issues with commercial entities that are being utilised by organised criminal gangs. So where you don't have a lot of transparency around corporate structures, it's really difficult to identify when there's a problem. So there's instances such as cargo fraud and theft of plant and cargo and that sort of thing. They're utilising false entities that have been created specifically for creating the fraud. So that's a major problem at the moment.
Thanks, Ben. Same question to you, Romain.
Bonjour, Lorraine. Very happy to be with you today. I think, as a general matter, I would say that the French market is not as mature as the market in the UK in fighting insurance fraud. So there is a tendency by many insurers to be more careful now because there has been a witnessing of encountering more fraud recently. And that's true in many different markets. That's true for construction. I'll come back to that later. For the car and motor industry, and as well as marine claims, I would say.
And over to you, Endri.
Well, as Romain said, in Italy, the market is even less mature than France with respect to insurance fraud. And when discussing insurance fraud in Italy, the focus tends to be on the motor sectors. These for two main reasons. The first one is that we have official data only in respect with motor third-party insurance liability. And the other one is that motor sector accounts for 70% of the fraudulent claims in Italy. However, in the most recent years, we are facing an increase across all the different lines of business. For example, life, personal injury, theft, transport, medical malpractice. And another quite concerning aspect that also Ben was highlighting is that the organized gangs, are showing an increasing interest in insurance fraud activities.
Thank you. Ben, what are the most common types of insurance fraud seen in your market, and can you share any examples?
If I look at the types of things that I see the most, I see a lot of opportunistic fraud in Ireland. People making personal injury claims that are exaggerating the extent of the injury. So there's quite a lot of that in Ireland. From an organised perspective, as I mentioned, there are challenges around cargo fraud, people using false identities to get into the supply chain. There's also construction, people involved in steel and plant, potentially for it to be taken to Ukraine, Gaza, those sort of places. We also see instances of stage thefts in hotels, whether it's criminal gangs who are operating in a hotel to steal the belongings of genuine people, or also using alleged thefts as ways in which they can mask money laundering. They'll say that they had a certain amount of money and expensive possessions stolen so they can make a claim, which then turns their dirty money into clean money as well. So there's quite a variety of things that are going on in Europe that I see.
Indeed. And passing over to Italy, Endri, same question.
Well, in Italy, I would say that the most common type of insurance fraud are in the motor sector, and they typically occur in high frequency, low value cases. As I was saying before, as I mentioned before, we have seen an increase in the recent year in other kind of businesses, especially personal injury and road accidents, property damage, and vehicle theft, which are quite expanding in the recent years. And I would like to share you an example of insurance fraud claims that grab the headlines of the leading Italian newspapers, because quite recently, in 2019, a criminal organization, which was composed of at least 34 members, was specialized in insurance fraud carried out through the mutilation, the deliberate mutilation of limbs of compliant victims. And this is an example that I want to share because it is one of the first times that an insurance fraud activity had been dealt with also by the national newspapers, because as I mentioned before, in Italy, our market is not as mature as it is in the UK and in France. We have also many cultural aspects involved in this. So it is important for Italy that fraudulent activities are advised. So as I was saying also before, this is an aspect which is quite relevant, because we do not want criminal organization and gang members to put their hands also on insurance fraud activities, because they have almost unlimited access to money, to artificial intelligence technologies.
Over to you in France, Romain.
One of the most common area for insurance fraud is the construction industry. As I mentioned, in France, the construction company need to have a number of mandatory coverages to carry out their activities. For example, decennial warranty or the coverage of reimbursement of advances, etc. And when some of these businesses cannot find this kind of coverage, they tend to forge insurance certificates, either to use certificates they had in the past or to use third parties' insurance certificates to pretend they still do benefit from this mandatory coverage. So that's the kind of cases we encounter on a weekly basis for our clients here. So the construction industry is really very exposed to insurance fraud. I would say there is another sector which deserve specific attention, which is insurance intermediaries, because in a number of cases, insurance intermediaries are not very transparent on the information they receive from the insured, and do not always transfer them accurately to the insurers, and try in the meantime to make money on the premium, or to take commitments that insurers are not aware of.
Ben, we all know that data is so important to detection of fraud. How comprehensive is the data on insurance fraud in your jurisdiction? For which insurance lines is data collected? And do you think there's more that we can be doing in this area?
Yeah, I think if you look at the data that we get from the IFB, there's quite a lot of data around certain lines. So you get a lot of data around motor accidents, casualty claims, property, a bit on sort of travel and that sort of thing. But generally, I think data is quite poor when it comes to commercial lines of business, and particularly cross-jurisdictional data as well. It's quite hard to get data when exposures are in other jurisdictions, and particularly with specialist lines of business as well. So if you're looking at marine or something like that, it's very difficult to get that data. So there could be a lot more done there. And I think one area that was highlighted recently, when I was listening to the Lamtiens podcast, they were trying to do an evaluation of the trend of EV thefts and comparing that to other vehicles and seeing why it might be different. But the problem they had was that there just wasn't the quality of the data there. Even though it was a motor line of business, they still didn't have the data. So I think there's an awful lot that needs to be done in that regard.
And it's interesting that you say that, it's in the mainstream, sort of the property, casualty, motor areas that we've come on an awful lot with the collection of data, but not so much in the commercial lines. Over to Romain, where is France in all of this?
I think in the UK, the overall amount of fraud is about 5 billion, right? So the amount of identified frauds, if I'm correct, Lorraine or Ben. I think in France, the latest data we have come from the ALPHA, the Association for Fighting Insurance Fraud. It dates back to 2024, and according to them, the total amount of insurance fraud in France was 900 million euro. Including 650 million for casualty and property, and the rest of it, about 250 million for life insurance and health insurance. So it leads me to believe that the data in France is not totally accurate, because I can't see that the amount of fraud in the UK could be 5 times more important than it is in France, and there's still a huge challenge in trying to collect the data. Another interesting data I came across was the data from Belgium, in which fraud went up from 6,000 to 7,000 cases, according to Assuralia, the Belgium Insurance Association. So I think the rise in insurance fraud is not specific to one jurisdiction on continental Europe, but it's a more general trend. And according to the French Insurer Association, that would represent about 3 to 4% of the amount of the indemnities paid over a year.
And Romain, can I stay with you on that? Because you talked about, that the data may not be accurate, and that's obviously a very big challenge. So what are the challenges around collecting and sharing the fraud data across Europe and the UK?
I think the system for going after fraud is very different in each jurisdiction, so that's why it has impact on the overall view you can have on the data in this respect. You'll tell me what is it in the UK. In France, you have to file a criminal complaint, for example, if you have identified an insurance fraud. And until very recently, this was a quite formalistic process. So many of the insurers, they didn't want to go through that process for each case they identified. So that's why we have a whole part which is actually below the radar. And actually, according to new reforms, you can now file a criminal complaint online. And I'm hopeful that it will help the process for insurers to actually raise issues in relation to fraud, and also to have more digitalized data to dig through in the future. So if you have many different data about fraud, for example, you can see that it affects more regions than another specific category of vehicle, as Ben mentioned, and that would indeed help after that in having red flag at the time of managing losses, etc.
And Ben, any views or observations on what Romain's just said?
Yeah, I think fundamentally the issue is that if you don't have the data, then the legislators don't understand the extent of the problem, and therefore not give sufficient priority to different legislation or strategies to deal with insurance fraud. So this area is really important, and one of the things that's been mentioned, I think, is in relation to the way in which data is captured. So in England and Wales, we can provide data on suspected fraudsters. We can have proven fraud, but proven fraud might be different to proven fraud in France. So when you're looking at sharing data, one of the problems is around uniformity of the data. So are you measuring fraud by the same yardstick? Are you calling it the same names? Exaggeration or staged or what have you? Are you able to compare it like for like because it's measured in the same way? But I think until we're able to capture that type of data, I don't think that the full extent of fraud in the UK and Europe will be fully understood.
No, agreed. And then Endri, what's your view from Italy?
Yeah, I wanted just to add something about this, because I think the real key point of all this discussion is the gathering of data, as Ben and Romain were saying. And a problem that we're facing in Italy is that insurance companies are currently highly investing on advanced tools, so artificial intelligence. But if we do not have uniform data and good quality data, also these investments have no real impact on counter fraud activities. So I think this is the key point that we must advertise in the coming years at an international level, not just at a national level.
And Ben, do you think that it's going to be possible to have that uniformity across all jurisdictions?
I think at the moment, probably not. As I say, I don't think that different countries possibly appreciate the extent of fraud and how it's impacting customers. So yeah, it's quite tricky. Like I said, it's a bit of a catch-22. You need to try and explain the problem, but you don't have the data to do it. But yeah, it's very tricky. But I think there's a lot of will when you speak to different insurers in different countries. People who work in our field in fraud detection. Everyone's got the will to work together and to do something about it. So hopefully that means that we will get a bit closer to joining up a bit more in that regard.
And staying with your point.
Apologies, Lorraine. In this respect, there is a very interesting recent survey conducted by ANIA in Italy, which showed that 72% of respondents here in Italy believe that there is no correlation between the insurance premium that they pay and fraud. So only 50% of respondents understands that the honest policyholders are paying also for those who defraud insurance companies. So just to give you some numbers and an idea of the differences between countries, I think in the UK the numbers are very, very different from the ones I just showed you. So this to me confirms that there is still much to do to have uniform data between different countries.
Yeah, agreed. And just picking up on the point about sort of impact and regulatory impact on fraud detection and collaboration, how do the GDPR and data protection regulations, in your view, impact the detection and collaboration in your jurisdictions? And I'll go to Romain first in France.
So there is an obvious contradiction between the rules on the protection of personal data and the need to process all these data by insurance to fight frauds. Actually, in France, it was handled by way of a decision of the CNIL, the authority in charge of overseeing rules on data protection, quite a long time ago, because it was in 2014 that the CNIL issued an opinion actually classifying the fight against insurance fraud as a legitimate purpose for processing personal data. So there is a legal basis for insurers to actually process personal data they collect to make sure they are efficiently fighting insurance fraud. Of course, this is subject to a number of caveats and rules and restrictions, but they are allowed, for example, to cross-reference their different databases, etc. And to create actually list of suspicious insureds on the basis of this regulation. So there is a way for insurers to use this, of course, with some regulatory framework.
And Ben, in your view?
I think from an outsider's perspective, it seems to me like even though GDPR comes from the same European directive, we've all applied it seemingly quite differently in the way that it's actually utilised in day-to-day life. When you look at it, a lot of them read the same, but it seems culturally there's a lot more reticence to investigate who an individual might be or that sort of thing because of a fear maybe of an information commissioner. I think it was quite useful in the UK that we had a note from our information commissioner to remind people that they are allowed to investigate entities for prevention of fraud. So that was really good, but there are jurisdictions that I see where even the basic KYC checks are difficult because they're concerned about infringing somebody's personal rights, when in fact also you are protecting customers by doing that. And I think I dare say in the UK, I think we've got a really good balance there. I don't feel like we have our hands tied when we're trying to investigate thoroughly, but still we are reminded of our responsibility to protect our customers' data as well. So unless we're able to get past that, I think it really hinders the ability to properly investigate and also share data. So it's quite a big problem.
And Endri, your view from the Italian perspective?
Yeah, from an Italian perspective, I feel like we have not the same balance that Ben was talking about when referring to the UK, because actually the Italian guarantor of privacy is interpreting and applying the GDPR in quite a strictly way. And in my view, the constraints are directly affecting fraud detection in Italy. We have data minimization, we have purpose limitation, we have further retention limits. And for a country like Italy, which, let me say, has not such a culture, such an experience when it comes to counter fraud, this is quite limiting. So I think also from a legal and legislative perspective, there is much more to do in our country in the coming years. Of course, there are also European concerns, so it does not depend solely on Italy. But I think this is one of the further key points that we will have to work on in the upcoming years.
Thank you for listening to Risk Matters, the DWF Insurance podcast. We hope you join us again soon for future podcasts in our series.